Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Wolff. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect for ZyLAB North America, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar on eDiscovery and the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Just a little bit of logistics today. This will be about a 30-minute presentation, including a little demonstration of how ZyLAB can assist with the needs for GDPR, as well as a Q&A at the end. I encourage you, if you do have any questions, please either use the question applet in the GoToWebinar control panel, or go ahead and you can also type them into the chat, and we'll be monitoring those. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be made available to you for replay later, or for those that were unable to attend. So what we're going to be talking about today, the GDPR, is as new privacy and data protection guidelines are getting stricter, organizations we see around the world are being forced to reconsider the way that they protect, handle, and transfer personal identifiable information. Here in the United States, we have the Freedom of Information Act for federal agencies. All states have some form of a Public Records Act, and some call it PRA, some call it FOIA. In the United Kingdom, they have the Subject Access Request. And as it relates to the European Union now, they're going to become, May of this year, be dealing with the General Data Protection Regulation. But all of these can benefit tremendously from tools that can help redact and analyze data. So we'll talk a little bit about how that, what GDPR is, how it impacts eDiscovery, and a little bit, like I said, a little bit of a demonstration and Q&A as we get further in. So what about the need for redaction? As you can see, every country, as I said, has its own regulations about how information that is requested by the public from government agencies is handled. This is often described as the law that keeps citizens in the know about their government, keeps everything transparent. The agencies that receive these requests are required to disclose that information under the appropriate regulations, unless that document falls under an established exemption. The exemptions themselves protect interests such as personal privacy, national security, law enforcement efforts. Those exemptions may vary per country, per region, or even per agency. The regulations to obtain information but are by the public are really a vital part of our democracy. Once an agency has to deal with a request, any documents that are exempt or are withheld need to be described. In FOIA, we call it a Vaughan index, but really it's a log. It's a document prepared by agencies opposing the disclosure of information under FOIA, for example. That index must describe each document or a portion of the document if you're just redacting part of it that's been withheld, and you have to provide justification of the grounds for non-disclosure. So in a FOIA exemption, you have to use the FOIA exemption that's relied upon. It must be stated in the Vaughan index. So what is GDPR? This is a regulation that is being introduced in the European Union, and the European Commission has created it to strengthen and unify data protection for individuals. Data privacy within the European Union has always been very high, more so I think than even in the United States. So the GDPR is now a way to formalize that the protection of the personal data within the EU. It's also a way to synchronize the present data protection levels of the various member states of the European Union. It addresses export of personal data outside of the EU. So this becomes very important for data that needs to be transferred outside of the EU because of regulatory requests. For example, data in virtual data rooms that's shared outside of the EU, or eDiscovery cases that require disclosure of data to parties outside of the EU. So this is why this becomes important even for U.S. organizations that deal with the European Union, whether they are multinationals that have divisions or departments or operating companies within the EU, or if they have to report on any information regarding EU citizens to U.S. regulatory agencies. GDPR really forces companies around the world to reconsider the way they handle personal information. But locating and encrypting that data is not the end of the challenge. One then also has to be able to auto-redact, anonymize, pseudonymize the data to guarantee that it can be safely transferred to third parties without violating the efforts of the GDPR. So where is this coming from? In the past, various member states have had data protection directives, specifically the 1995 Data Protection Directive 4060C. Various member states had their own implementations. However, they were never really very well instituted or policed. They were a bit loose, and they had very loose guidelines, very loose penalties as well. So a lot of corporations would not worry about it. But come May 25th, 2018, when GDPR actually goes into effect, it's really going to harmonize all of these individual data protection directives within the EU member states and create this one overarching regulation. Now, member states are able to vary their privacy beyond what's established in GDPR. In other words, GDPR sets the minimum threshold at a fairly high level, but then member states can actually make more inclusive, more restrictive policies if they want on top of that. But at the very minimum, the GDPR is creating a threshold there that is higher than what it exists today. Also, very importantly, there are much higher sanctions for breaches by organizations now to the GDPR, like I said, which didn't exist in the past. Penalties as high as up to 4% of a corporation's annual revenue for breaches of the GDPR. So where will this apply? In material scope, so that's Article 2, it'll apply to any data that's processed by automated means. Any data that's processed by automated means which form the part of a filing system. So if you have an electronic record system, that falls into the material scope. But then in territorial scope of Article 3, processing activities of an establishment in the EU or outside of the EU if the data subjects are members of the EU. So as I mentioned, the offering of goods and services or the monitoring of data subjects' behavior for members of the European Union, even by organizations outside of the EU, meaning the United States or other countries within North America, for example. So we're throwing around a few terms here when we talk about anonymization and pseudonymization. That is making sure when we anonymize a document, redact it, we are completely restricting what you see underneath that text. However, and so you can notice that by the redaction on the bottom of the screen, that's anonymized because it's completely covered up. There's no identifying information on top of it. However, if you look at the redactions at the top of this particular email message that we're looking at, those have been pseudonymized. What I mean by that is we've redacted the information, but it is still associated. It can still be associated to John Doe in this case or Jane Doe by the classification number that is put on top of the redaction. That classification number is then tied into another system where that information can be tracked, but it can be protected. So therein lies the difference between completely anonymizing the document and actually pseudonymizing the document, so that the information, the privacy information of Jane Doe or John Doe is protected in this respect. So let's talk a little bit more about this pseudonymization. That is not a term most people are used to, but the GDPR encourages pseudonymization of personal data, meaning what we're used to in the United States is personal identifiable information, social security numbers, taxpayer ID numbers, credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, passport numbers, addresses, phone numbers. Those are things we would typically, in data that has to be redacted for public disclosure, those things would be eliminated. They would be anonymized. Here we're talking about pseudonymization, which is a little bit different. Data can no longer be attributed, as you can see in the middle box, to a data subject, but the additional information can be kept as long as it is kept separately, and the separate information is subject to appropriate technical security measures. So if you can put a reference number on a redaction and keep that reference number attached to another system that is protected, you can pseudonymize the data and still provide that to the requesters without compromising the European Union citizens' privacy. But there lies the differentiation between pseudonymizing and anonymizing. It's much easier to anonymize the data just by redacting it, but that is not really a viable option here. So the process of pseudonymization for rendering data neither anonymous nor directly identifiable, pseudonymization is the separation of data from direct identifiers so that the linkage to an identity is not possible without additional information that's held separately. That's the important part to get out of this. GDPR creates incentives for organizations to pseudonymize the data they collect, and although that pseudonymized data is not exempt from the regulation altogether, the GDPR relaxes several of the requirements for organizations that use this technique. Humans have cognitive limitations when processing and deriving insight from large-scale data sets. We know that simply we cannot successfully synthesize large volumes of data. We're inconsistent, humans make errors, we're even inconsistent in our inconsistencies sometimes. If you ask 3 reviewers to look at the same data set, they're not necessarily going to process the data the same way. Grossman and Cormack published a famous passage here in the Richmond Journal of Law and Technology that states artificial intelligence is not only more effective than human review at finding relevant documents, but also much cheaper. Overall, the myth that exhaustive manual review is the most effective and therefore the most defensible approach to document review is strongly refuted. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that and how that plays into an eDiscovery space by using automated tools to do redaction, consistent redaction, both from an anonymization as well as a pseudonymization standpoint. So if humans can't do it automatically, what is the solution? Well, the solution is really using tools, advanced text mining technology that can look through data, identify people, places, organizations, and appropriately redact that data, either for complete anonymization or, as I mentioned, in the case of GDPR, for pseudonymization. That data can be PII, personal identifiable information, or protected health information, PHI, what we refer to in the United States as information under the HIPAA Act. For example, PII, like I said, people, email addresses, names, phone numbers, SSN, bank account numbers, etc. The GDPR also takes that a step further. So under the GDPR, personal information as data revealing racial or ethnic origin, sexual orientation, political opinion, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union memberships, even the processing of genetic data or biometric data for the purposes of uniquely identifying a person is all protected under the GDPR. So it takes the privacy laws that we have in the US and goes much further with them. So it's much more complicated to be able to restrict the your data in such a way that it complies with GDPR. One of my personal favorite movies, 1999's The Matrix. There's a famous quotation from one of the characters, Agent Smith, that never send a human to do a machine's job. And that is truly the case here. We're saying that the most appropriate way to handle redactions and pseudonymizations under GDPR is to use tools that are capable to do automated text mining, entity extraction, and auto redaction. So how does this impact, how does GDPR impact eDiscovery? Well, in a few different ways. We see a number of use cases when we're talking to our customers about eDiscovery, our eDiscovery tools. They really break down into eDiscovery, litigation, regulatory request responses, internal investigations. In those cases, you want to anonymize or pseudonymize all the data before that information is transferred to any regulatory agency or party outside of the EU. So if you're providing data outside of the European Union with information regarding EU citizens, you're going to have to identify and either anonymize or pseudonymize the personal data. If you're dealing with M&A, mergers and acquisitions, for example, where you're sharing data in a virtual data room, again, all personal identifiable information really should be anonymized or pseudonymized before those contracts are disclosed in the VDR. So with that, let's go ahead and jump over to a little demonstration, and I'll just kind of walk you through a few of the use cases that we're talking about here. So I'm going to jump over to my instance of the ZyLAB 1 eDiscovery. And I need to, in this case, I need to take a look at some of the documents that I've uploaded to the system here. I've received a public records request. I'm going to open that public records request up in ZyLAB. ZyLAB is going to present some auto-classification information to me. This information is being visualized in what we call facets. And here I can see I have a lot of potential exemption codes that I've loaded into the system. So it's looking through the data for me to do automated classification and automatic identification of documents that are potentially exempt for one reason or another. So I can take a look at those documents, see what we've got here. And I've received a request for information. I need to respond to that request. I have a document here that's been marked potentially exempt under a California PRA statute. Notice that the person's name, this is a screenshot actually of a credit report, and the person's name has been auto-redacted here. So if I hover over it, I can see that Charlie Credco's name has been auto-redacted using the ZyLAB software. And but the system has auto-redacted that for me, so I don't have to worry about it. And that's because I put his name on a list of people that I want auto-redacted. So that is something very simple you can just do by the name. So I will show you what I mean by that. I have a list here. I look at the auto-redaction functionality. I can see a query here that has a list of people. If those people appear in my document, I want to auto-redact their names, so I can protect their privacy there. But I need to take it a step further than that. I notice that his social security number is visible here. So let's go and create a new rule where we can auto-redact social security numbers. So I'm going to add a new rule here in ZyLAB, and I'm going to call it SSN. And I will paste in, this is a regular expression pattern for a social security number in the United States. 3 numbers followed by a hyphen, followed by 2 numbers, followed by a hyphen, followed by 4 numbers. Very straightforward. ZyLAB is able to recognize patterns, whether they're numeric or alphanumeric, and let you automatically redact those. So I'm going to select from a code set here. I have a number of different states' public records acts. I'm going to select California's, and I'll select personal privacy exemption. And I'll even let's put that in red so it looks interesting, and we'll save that. So that rule is now in effect in my data set. So I'll switch back over to the live data set here, and let's take a look at let's run a search for documents that might contain a social security number. So we'll look for social security numbers. There's that same pattern, and I can see there are a number of documents that have a social security number in them. And we'll just open one of them up here. This is someone sent some candidate info about this particular. Let's see what. Yep, here's a copy of candidate's personal info, Kristen Pepper, for you to review and take a look at the attachment. And again, yep, there's Kristen Pepper's job application, a screenshot actually of it. And again, here is her social security number, which has been auto-redacted. If I double-click on it or hover over it, I can see that her number is under there, but the system has auto-redacted it for me. So I can go ahead and produce this document out to the. It was part of a public records request or a regulatory request. I can produce this document out, protecting her privacy there. That type of redaction can be done with any type of document. I can also, the rules can actually get even more specific than that, so I could actually extract within the text of the document any names if I wanted to, just by identifying that Kristen Pepper is a person. I can restrict her name. If there are other information here that I want to restrict, perhaps I want to restrict her passport number or her date of birth, I can set those up for a redaction as well. Even her applicant ID, that's going to be if that's going to be a way to track her, I would need to make sure that that's restricted as well. So tools like ZyLAB allow you to create rules for auto redaction so that you don't have to manually go through every document and look for that type of data. Now, of course, I need to make sure that when I produce this document out, I also have to produce out a log that shows what things I've exempted, whether it's entire documents or just redaction in this case. So I need to create a VON index or an exemptions report, depending on the jurisdiction you're talking about. Let's do that. We'll go back to the home page here. and we'll browse for all the content here that we want. So we'll grab our saved searches, and I only want to see, out of the 1,213 documents, I only want to see documents that have redactions in them. So I'm running a search for documents that contain redactions, and I have 7 documents here, including the one that I just looked at. And I'm going to go ahead to my reporting feature. And I'm going to include redaction information in my report. I'll export that to a CSV. That file will open up here. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. I have that open right here. Oops. There we go. So that, what it is just export the information from ZyLAB into a CSV, which I can open up in Excel, that shows me the names of the file. Under each document, there is also, wherever there's a redaction appears, it shows me what page the redaction appeared on, who created the redaction, what redaction code was used, etc. So all that information is in here, and I can then massage this to whatever format I need to provide that report to the requester. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor for how there are tools out there that can do this type of work. I just want to let you know also that that ZyLAB has an entire community online. It's located at help.zylab.com. If you have questions about these types of redactions or entity extraction or data mining tools that can be used for anonymizing or pseudonymizing content, or how to deal with restrictions under the GDPR, I encourage you to visit our site, help.zylab.com, for a lot of useful information. ZyLAB has also published a number of resources, ebooks that we provide free of charge in this area. One's around assisted review and how AI impacts eDiscovery, but specifically the one on the bottom left, critical technology in the era of the GDPR, I think is very germane to this particular topic. So I strongly encourage you to check those out at zylab.com/resources/ebooks. And then let's see if we have any questions from the audience. So yes, someone asked if the deck that I'm using will be made available. Yes, it will be. It's also part of the presentation. So that will absolutely be available for you. What other questions do we have here? Someone asked, working at law firms, we don't own the data of our clients. So what are the implications to us under GDPR? Well, that's actually a really good question. As GDPR states, law firms and suppliers of legal services involving data are seen actually as data processors. So meaning that legal person or the agency or the body that processes the data on behalf of a controller, you fall under GDPR, and there's really strict requirements for data processors. So I encourage you, if you are at a firm and you process data from EU citizens, make sure you look at the GDPR statute for data processors. So let's see what else we have here. We're part of a U.S. company. Should we care about the GDPR? Well, absolutely. Really all organizations that offer goods or services to subjects located in the EU and who collect and store their information, that you fall under GDPR. So, and this even includes online sales or e-commerce. So that's a really important consideration. If your customer is in the EU or you're collecting data on a European Union citizen, you absolutely have to care about this. Someone asked, what's a good argument to convince our management to take action on this? Well, you know, when May 18 comes around, or I should say May 25th, 18 comes around, a single European subject, a citizen of the EU, can request that all data that any company holds on him or her be removed. So if you don't have a good way to demonstrate that you can do that, you could be sued under GDPR, and really, there's not a good defense there. So we strongly recommend all companies consider how they handle their data privacy, especially as it relates to EU citizens. And if you're doing business with the EU, you need to have some sort of data classification and eDiscovery tools in place come this May 2018. Someone asked, do we need large amounts of data to justify the cost of a solution like this? No, absolutely not. In fact, maybe if you want to purchase a solution like this for on-premises, yes. But if you are using something like our ZyLAB 1 software as a service platform, even a small case with a few gigs of data is really going to be cost effective for you, and I strongly encourage you to consider looking into a little bit more. So with that, I think that's the last question. Yep, that's the last question in the queue. We run power demos and other webinars like this on a regular basis, so I encourage you to go to zylab.com/company/event calendar for more information and see when we're running our next webinars. But thank you all for your attendance today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.